now.
Maybe, yeah, yeah.
Right,
Maybe.
Yeah, that's pretty noisy.
I don't know, I'm from such a different kind of realm that
Yeah.
that stuff doesn't.
But of course,
You
then
name
when
what,
she
all
drove
these
around
different
to go pull on
Yeah.
the
things that you read.
office would
Yeah,
fly there.
yes, there's a
But
whole
by
lot of
then,
stuff.
they're fast. They can just shut down and have that day closed and be gone. They know how to do business.
No, a lot of it's kind of technical, you know,
So-
sewer stuff, sewers and water lines and.
Oh, we should
I
have
didn't
my
have
husband.
to look.
He does water treatment.
Tell Ron.
For the city or for someplace else?
Well, he's retired.
Retired, yeah.
Actually disabled now. But him and his, they have arrow
Between the
business.
meetings, between working,
Put in,
stay at the office.
water, single family water
And they're
treatment
remodeling the city
Oh,
hall, so
yeah.
they have a steering hall
things.
there.
Well, I didn't get a chance to click on all of those attachments so I could see it. I thought, is Tom gonna have
It's all the
100?
stuff on the website.
Are you gonna have 100 slideshows to show us on this?
Mostly just
You need to
question and
cheat
answer mostly.
For the,
Oh, your little script?
I'll lead the discussion and
I
answer
didn't see it.
questions.
I kinda think of this as a place to kinda educate myself for city
Flying
companies and
away.
they're gonna make the decisions. If there's any leeway or whatever. Then move forward from here.
Yeah.
Winging
And
it.
so we just praying to God the council members watch.
So do you work for the forestry?
I know,
The
and I was
documents
thinking.
between
I work
now
for
and-
Federal Energy Regulatory Commission.
Oh, okay.
FERC.
Or at least hide out in the Zoom meeting and watch.
Yeah, so I was kinda prepping myself, so I didn't ask too many stupid questions. And you're just gonna be me and ask.
No stupid.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, these things are supposed to be up, right?
I'm simping for my
It's
sins.
up
I'm
for
thinking-
on and down for off.
Yeah, I mean, like, as
Okay.
soon as you say something and then they ask, I'm like, they just said, it, just answered it.
2 weeks.
Well, if you're thinking if there's 10 more people in the community who have the same question.
Show me, oh, library.
Well, now this
Yeah,
is
the
like
staff
the
and all
olden
good people,
days.
yeah.
It's just me.
Yeah.
I said.
Well, you
no,
can smell them, but you don't have to eat them.
Tal
There's
was
basically
nice
3
enough
guys
to
and
put
3
them
women.
within reach.
That's right.
But some of them only work part-time, so, or some day, certain days,
Yeah.
not every day.
Oh, we got donuts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had a salad for dinner, so
Good for
I
you.
could have a donut.
Oh,
You
that gives
okay,
you,
Cal?
Just trying to find, there it is.
Having trouble getting started?
Trying to find the agenda. All right. Got it. Do I wanna, start video and audio on this Zoom deal? I can do it, I'm just wondering if I should, okay. I'm not gonna let anybody in. Tired of that.
that was fun last time, yes.
Fun for who?
For him,
Okay.
for the whoever the guy was.
Start recording. Record to this computer.
Ask that you make sure you speak into your microphones tonight.
Okay. All right.
Oh, did you plug the speaker into the
Yeah.
computer? Okay. 'Cause normally it says you're now recording. Did I miss that?
She plugged it in before, like, a long time ago, and turned it all on and got it all.
But it's recording?
Says it's recording, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. It is 7:04 on Thursday, March 20th, 2025. Calling this meeting of the Woodland Washington Planning Commission to order. Planning Commission reviews all sorts of things. Sometimes I don't know my script. We act as a quasi judicial body, and you can appeal things. We're not doing that tonight. Britta, would you call roll?
Tel Jensen,
I'm here.
Brian Matson,
Present.
Sharon Watt,
Present.
Robin Zurich,
Zorich.
Zorich, Dave Simpson.
Here.
Okay, we got a full house. Outstanding. First up on the agenda is citizen communications for items that are not on the agenda. Let's see. We did have one. Terry Hall. Okay. Any of that? Any citizen communication for items not on the agenda? Okay. All right. If you change your minds, I'll consider allowing that. Next up is approving the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda. Second.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Anyone opposed to approving the agenda as written? Motion carries. Moving on is our consent items and approving the minutes of our February 20th, 2025 meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes from February 20th.
Second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded to approve the minutes. Anything to say about that? No? Anyone opposed to approving the minutes as written? Motion carries. Minutes are approved. Before we move on, I saw in the packet November minutes. Was that deliberate? Do we still need to approve those? Or was that just an artifact?
Let's take a look.
Okay. We can come back to that too.
So I see the February minutes. Are you saying the November minutes are in here as well?
I saw the November minutes tacked onto the end.
I wonder if it maybe wasn't an attachment to the February agenda? And
So I'm looking at it right at this very moment. So if I go to the agenda and click on the February minutes, I see the February minutes. That's page 2 of 152. And then right below that I see November 21st.
I'm sorry, it's page what?
152?
Would be page 3.
I'm sorry, page
3.
Page 3.
One more.
So page 1, or, so let's start from the beginning. So there's the minutes for February,
There's
and then the
for
minutes
November.
for November. I see that. We will have to take a look at that. We may have attached 2 sets of minutes.
Okay.
I apologize.
No, not a big deal.
So the way the software works is it may print all of the attachments that are attached to the agenda.
Okay.
So it may just be a duplicate of your packet, not just the minutes.
All right. No problem. Thought maybe you're just trying to.
Because
Sure
your
we're paying
February
attention.
agenda had the November minutes attached to it. And so
That did occur to me, yeah.
it's
The
a
whole
file.
November packet
It,
is
it's
tacked onto the,
I got you.
a
Okay.
file within a file, so when you attach the file, all of the sub-files go
All
with it.
right, let us then move on to our first discussion workshop, which is looking at survey results, which I thought was very interesting.
Okay, so what I would like to do before we move to these individual items is Commissioner Simpson at the last meeting brought up some interesting questions, and he and I had a conversation afterwards, and I wanted to kind of bring you up to give you a little background, and especially for the members of the community who may not understand the implications of that question at the last meeting. So I wanted to dive into some of the data and how the consultants found it and used it and why it's in there the way it is. Because we are not because we're not writing a new comprehensive plan, we didn't necessarily go into that amount of detail, so maybe I need to go back and cover that like I had in previous versions. So the presentation is going to cover essentially the project page that we have been using and keeping up to date. And you can see the description of the project, and down below there's a list of meetings, and then below that is a section of files. So when you open that up, there's a lot of documents here which are going to continue to be updated. And so I wanted to give you a little background on that and how to read those and navigate those. And one of the issues that was raised by Commissioner Simpson at the last meeting, and that is how did the consultant come to the conclusions that they've used in their analysis? So I'd like to pick some of those files and go over those quickly. And this one specifically is the vacant and redevelopable residential parcels map that is on that list. And at the last meeting, I talked about how it's a moving target. We took a snapshot, and we have projects that are in work. And how did the consultant balance the fact that there was vacant land with approvals, vacant land that hadn't been developed, and potentially redevelopable properties? So let's go over that real quick. So the vacant and vacant and redevelopable lands map is before you here. And you see in the solid green is the parcels that are vacant. And the green hash marks are parcels that are vacant but planned for development. And then the yellow are parcels that are potentially redevelopable. And so there's various parcels that are inside and outside the city limits. And since this was for the housing discussion, this is the map that they pulled. And so you can look at this map and you might ask questions, well, why are some of them identified as redevelopable? We'll get into that. But the ones that are developable, the data is also in the documents that are on the page. So where that comes from is it's essentially pulled from the assessor's auditor or the assessor's office, the tax rolls from Cowlitz County. And here is a property, a random property that I pulled up. Actually, I think this is 230 Davidson. This is City Hall. And when you go to the county website and you're looking at your parcel, there is a code down here called the tax area code. And in this case, it's 900, which is a type of land use code. Or in this case, it's a business and professional office. But if it's like a different code, it'll say residential or multifamily residential apartments. So the tax code allows you to sort data so that if it's residential code or if it's a commercial code or an industrial code, it helps you sort through all of the information that's available. And then the next thing they will do is as you slide down your tax records, if you're looking up your own property, there is a land value number, and then there is an improvement value number for the value of your property. So in this case, the land that City Hall is on is worth $52,500. and the building itself is valued at 315,000. So you can look at this number and see if it's in the residential code and it has a land value but no building value, that tells us it's vacant. As opposed to if its land value is 50,000 and the building value is 300,000, it's a developed property. But you could have a $50,000 property with a $50,000 building, then that falls into that gray area where the planner might assign it as its potential redevelopment because it's an old home or it's tiny, and given the value of the property is 200,000 and the house is 50,000, it's prime candidate for demolishing and rebuilding or subdividing as an infill project. So that's how they arrived at the numbers that they put on the map, and then kind of once they scrub that data, then they start treating it as, with these planning assumptions, how we're going to plan for the future. Okay, so Dave, I'm going to go to Robin first because Robin had her hand first.
So what happens to properties like Woodland Park East?
Okay, so Woodland Park East, a lot of people may not fully understand this, but there's two terms that we use in planning, and that is parcels and lots. A lot theoretically is a subdivided property that's created through a land division. A parcel is generally talked about as a tax parcel. So if you have a farm and you pay 10% of the taxes if it's in ag status or forestry property. If you're growing trees on it, you pay a lower tax rate. And at any time you could say, okay, I want to build a house on my farm or build my son a farm house. And so what they do is they will create a tax parcel for 1 acre of land, and that 1 acre of land is taxed as residential, and then the other 19 acres is on the original farm parcel, and it's charged at farm rates. So you don't have two developable lots. You can't build a house and then separate it into two tax bills and then build another house on the farm. That's not how it works. You never subdivided the property. They're just different. So you could theoretically go to the assessor's office and say, I want a tax bill for my front yard, and I want a tax bill for my backyard, and I want a tax bill for my house. Those are separate tax entities, but they're not separate lots. So in the case of Woodland East, the parcel is taxed for the value. And then if you get in the tax records, you'll see those lines. Those lines represent your individual units because it is your physical property, and we tax that structure, but theoretically there's no land value because you don't own the land, you just simply own the structure.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
it does.
Yeah.
But what do I look under to get the amount of the lot, of the
Yep.
parcel?
So when you go to the county website, you can look it up by address, you could look it up by parcel number, and each parcel will have one just like this. So you can get to this screen and you can just arbitrarily click on a property and it'll bring up the data for that property. And the GIS profile gives you the latest photo that the assessor's office uses, and here's some information about who owns it and the codes and how the tax rates that it's in there. And then down below there's additional property details. So in this case, the City Hall was built in 1948 and the square footage is 3,500 square feet. So it gives you a little bit. You can see the assessed value over the last few years, and you can even get a copy of the notice of valuation. And then down below, as you keep going down here, these are the individual Treasurer's Office tax statements, and if you click on one of these, sorry, rabbit hole, but let's go down there while we're here. So this is the actual tax billing statement that you get every year, and it tells you this is how much the city paid in taxes and where that tax money goes. So you can actually see how much goes to state levy number 1 and state levy number 2, how much goes to the cemetery district, how much goes to the diking district, how much goes to Clark Cowlitz Fire Rescue, Library District, every junior taxing district is on here. And basically at the end, there's a total of what you paid this year, and you can compare it to what you paid last year. And you can say, well, why did my taxes go up $300? Well, it's because your school taxes went up $200 and your cemetery bill went up $400, but your fire bill went down $100. So you can actually track and see where your tax money's going here.
That's pretty good.
That's a, yeah, it's about $3,000 light for a $250,000 place. Okay, turn to my question.
Okay.
So the two developments, short plats that Scott Brunson did on Washington Street, would they have fallen into that criteria? Was the land value as such and the house value as such that they would have showed up as a redevelopable property in that?
So that is a good question, and I happen to know the answer to that is because it actually fell into the category where it's potential redevelopable and it's in permitting.
So it did fall in that.
Yep, and we'll go there and
The
I'll
house was of low enough value on both of those?
Yeah, well, not necessarily because it was low enough value, but I fed them the information of all the permits that were pending.
Okay, so if there were no permits, or there was an identical piece of property on CC Street with almost a half acre and a house,
Yes,
if the house is worth $300,000, I mean, it could still pencil out to develop and be something we should be considering.
yes, but it is not in this map because I think they picked a $50,000 structure value, and so they picked a really low bar because they didn't want to count on nice houses being subdivided because it's not dependable, because it's, yeah, really they looked for the low-hanging fruit that was likely to
That house
develop.
has been boarded up on CC Street for forever, is that in this inventory?
You know, I haven't checked that one, but that is a good question. So, we,
I guess at the end of the day, I'm kind of questioning the quality of the data,
yes, so.
especially where redevelopment is important to.
Yep. So before
The
you
cause
leave
here.
tonight, you and I can talk about that and do a little testing to see how comfortable you are with that. I just don't want to show up that property owner right now.
But
Right.
I
Yep.
understand that, but
But yes, we should be able to truth test the quality of this map by looking at that one and seeing if it's on here.
it's not too late to do that.
No. Well,
Did the consultant put that map together?
they did, using the Cowlitz County Assessor's data at the time they ran the report. Yeah. And so part of what they did is they just did a truth test to find out if we had enough capacity. And we'll get into that report, which is one of the documents on the page. Yep. So, okay, Assessor's Office, tax parcel, let's close this one. Okay, so, based upon that, well, I think I want to go to this one here next. Okay. So one of probably the documents that we've had the longest time to look at since July of last year. This is one of the technical documents that was created by the consultant, and it kind of gets into some of the detailed analysis that Dave is getting into. Maybe I will go back and cover that one first. So they came and made this presentation in November of last year to the council, and let's see. So here is the information specifically that Dave was looking at. So they are looking for, they identified the vacant or redevelopable parcels. They applied some reduction factors, figured out how much land capacity there is by income band, which is this slide here. And then they looked at housing allocations. So At the last meeting, I talked about, we've got these moving timeframes that make it difficult for us, and that is Clark County is the 2025 timeframe that we are matching. And Clark County, much bigger jurisdiction, they have much more staff to work on this, and so their long-range planning is separate from their current planning. We don't have that luxury, so because they have multiple planners working on it and they're dealing with multiple jurisdictions, they're doing a much different analysis than we are. But essentially what they determined is, in this document here, which I don't have slides of, but it is on the website, it is a discussion of the Clark County 2025 Comprehensive Plan update. And they have an ongoing vacant buildable lands model that they work with, and they look at it both inside the urban growth boundaries and the rural outside the growth boundaries. And essentially what they determined is the city of Woodland has, by their estimates, 145 people within Clark County, and in the next 20 years we are going to add 185 people within Horseshoe Lake, within the shoe of Horseshoe Lake, for a total of 330 people. And of their total value, of their total population of, I believe it's about 450,000 people, 527,000 people, Clark County estimates they're going to add about 190,000 people. And of that, they gave the city of Woodland 0.01%, because that's how much of their population we currently have. And as a result of those 190,000 new residents, they expect that 185 of them to live inside Horseshoe Lake within that curve there. And so that's a little problematic for us, because while that works for Vancouver, Camas, Washougal, all the communities and the rural population in Clark County, it doesn't work for the city of Woodland, because there's basically two big properties that are outside the boundaries. One of them is a giant wetland parcel. The other one is a small RV park that currently exists. And so we can't really accommodate that. But by doing the mathematics, according to Clark County's current planning process, what we determined is that 185 people will essentially have to share 105 units within Horseshoe Lake. And so that's problematic, because I think we only currently have 84, 86 units within Horseshoe Lake. So Clark County's expectation would be that we would double or triple the number of units that we have within Horseshoe Lake itself on that little island out there. So that's problematic for us. The math just doesn't work. But under the Growth Management Act, it's very structured that you have to do the math, and the math tells you what you have to plan for, and you have to act accordingly. And if you have to increase densities, you have to increase densities, and realistically what that means is we'd have to have a 105 unit apartment building that might be 30 stories tall, like we're in downtown Vancouver, BC, but it's not practical for the city of Woodland. And so GMA kind of breaks down. The consultant and I had this conversation, and by doing the math, the portion of Cowlitz County could accommodate those units a little easier. So the memo that SCJ kind of ran that analysis. But fundamentally, we acknowledge, and we've had the conversation with Commerce, and that is, yes, that fundamental math breaks down for Woodland, because it's like you can't do it for Woodland. And what we discussed with them, and they essentially have agreed, and there's no real mechanism for making that adjustment, but we are just making the assumption that we're going to accommodate those units within the city as opposed to just within Horseshoe Lake. And so we can accomplish that by increasing densities and the vacant land that we have. Plus we have so many homes within the pipeline that it kind of offsets, but it creates a different problem for us. And that is, we have subdivisions, we really our last subdivision was 2012, and then we had kind of 2 or 3 of them post-COVID, and now they're in construction. So the numbers I use are 25 units in the previous 4 years, and then we had 25 units in 2024, and it looks like we'll have 50 to 70 in 2025, 26, 27, because we have these 3 subdivisions, and those 3 subdivisions will use 80% of our vacant land supply in the next 5 years, and our 20-year growth supply may not really last more than 5 years, and that's kind of why. It's because we're so small. These fundamental calculations that GMA forces on us, you got to do the math, and even though the math tells you something that's not can't happen is gonna happen, we just, because we're stuck having to adopt a comp plan this year without expanding our urban growth boundary, we're just looking at numbers that may not reflect reality after 3 or 4 years. It's kind of doesn't make sense from a 20-year point of view, but.
So what did they do? Do they fine us?
Okay, so we'll talk about that, because theoretically, this is where I get back to at the last meeting. I said we're going to have to adopt a 2025 comp plan that says theoretically we have enough land to accommodate it, but next year we're going to go to Cowlitz County and say, look, in 5 years we are going to be out of land, so we need to have this discussion about expanding the urban growth boundary. And they're either going to say, nope, you've proved you meet GMA, we're not talking urban growth boundary, or they're going to say, yes, we understand what you're in an impossible situation, let's discuss expanding the urban growth boundary, but there's no guarantee that they're going to be receptive to that conversation.
Who exactly is saying that? Like the county commissioners, the planning commission?
Both. And
Planning
so
commission?
staff, planning commission, the citizens may not want it, and the county commissioners ultimately are going to have to make that decision. And you know, because you sat through all of those meetings and discussions in 2018, 2019, and the county showed up with the deputy prosecuting attorney and the planning director, and they basically said, you can't do this because it's not consistent with our growth boundary. Therefore, the chicken and the egg discussion is not relevant because we don't want you to have a chicken. So
I'm not online and able to pull some things up myself. So when we look at this allocation, and it says for Clark County 2020 supply and 55, is that 55 residences or 55 acres or 55 people, or what's the supply there?
So Cowlitz County is Clark County is strictly looking at Clark County.
Yeah.
And so that is their analysis of the units that are supply in
That we currently have in the county.
In Clark County.
County, that we have 55 units, and we're allocated to add 105
yes. So they're
units.
asking us
And
to
we
say-
have how many acres?
Well, so the acres isn't really relevant. It's density per acre, because there's a lot of land, but it's very beautiful forested wetland that they can't
Right.
develop because it's in the shoreline. And yeah, so the ultimate constraint is going to be a density question.
And that's where I'm headed. So
Yes.
how many acres is it?
I would have to check, but I want to say it's in the neighborhood of, might even be in the neighborhood of 50.
50?
Yeah.
So like with, let's say 20 developable, maybe 30, and we have our PURD code
Yep.
that would allow for the working with of the wetlands and the nature and the income levels and everything else, could get them up to 30 units an acre.
Yes, without even changes,
So
we
we
could,
actually have a mechanism to meet that. All we have to do is possibly say the only way to plan, the only way to develop in the Clark County portion of the city is through our PURD.
Yes, so
You know,
theoret-
because Centralia did that. They said any subdivisions have to be done through the PURD.
Yep,
So we do have a mechanism that we could meet that.
yep, yep. And it's funny because for the record, when I moved to Clark County in 1999, I was the shoreline planner, and that area within Clark County is in the shoreline. And I happened to have a conversation with the gentleman who owns that property, and he swore to me that he would never develop that property. And here I am 26 years later, and I have never received a phone call from him.
We just have to plan
Yeah,
for it. We
yep,
don't have to make
yep.
people do it.
Yes, so the assumption is that we are going to get around that roadblock of him not being interested in development, since we're gonna plan for those units, because we can't plan on him changing his mind. Yeah, but if it does, yeah, then we would far exceed our abilities by applying density.
So we
in-
could adjust our goals accordingly to where we at least have the goal and the means to meet the goal.
Yes, and in order for that gentleman to develop, because he is in our urban growth boundary, he would have to request annexation, and that annexation would come before you, and you would be able to recommend a zoning for that property, because it's designated for residential, but it has no zoning. So you would be able to influence that zoning decision upon annexation, and the council would be able to require certain conditions upon annexation. Yeah. And one of the biggest factors for that area in Clark County is there was no city sewer to that site. And just last summer, we constructed sewer out there, and Island Air RV Park, or mobile home park, is currently under construction for sewer main, so that all of the manufactured homes there will be connected to the sewer by the end of this summer. So even for the homes that are beyond the mobile home park, will have sewer available to them. And so that hurdle is no longer there. So the potential for development out there is very real. And even that wasn't available for their consideration in '24 when they did this paper. Any other questions? Okay, and what's another thing I want to point out, and that is one of the other tools for growth management is they look at the availability of housing in each income bracket, and we did a housing needs assessment 2 years ago, and it's also available on the city website. And I wanted to discuss how they define that. And one of the things that's important, an important term that you'll see a lot in the documents, and that is the area median income. And again, going back to elementary mathematics refresher, the median is the absolute center number with an even number on higher and an even number lower. So it's not an average income, it's the half the community is above this, half the numbers below this. And housing essentially falls into 3 categories, and that is if your household income is less than 80% of that median income, you're considered low income for the purposes of housing. If you're between 80 and 120, you're kind of considered mid-income for mid-income housing. And if you make more than 120% of the median income, then you would be considered in the high-income housing category. And so,
Hold on just a second. Is that, that median is that a census area, or is that Woodland proper?
and that's part of the trick, that I'm not exactly familiar with how they raise that number, because it could be some jurisdictions use school districts, some just use city limits. which usually could match, but don't necessarily match, especially if you're in a rural school district. So I would need to look into that and figure out exactly what it is. And that is an important question because in 2023, we used city boundaries and we determined the average or the area median income was about 63,000. But that was using, I want to say, the latest data that was available, which I think was 2019. And if you were to just Google today's median income, I think the number is now 83,163. So the median income either went up $19,000 in the last 5 years, or 5 years, or we're using a different area to calculate that.
Yeah, where'd that number come from, that 83,000?
I Googled that for City of Woodland median income. So, but that's also making an assumption that Google knows what the hell City of Woodland.
Yeah, the internet's getting dumber and dumber every
Yeah,
day.
yeah. With
we have-
AI, it might be looking at our zip code as Woodland and calculating that.
It is Woodland, Washington, right? Because there
Yeah.
are other woodlands.
Yeah. Good question. Yes, it is Woodland, Washington. But what this is showing you up here is Clark County, because they have more resources and little better data, time to scrub it. So they allocated 105 units, and they, according to their calculations, we need to add 12 units within Horseshoe Lake that are 0 to 30% of the median income, and that we need 7, so actually what we need to do is 19. They just have 2 categories because they have obsessive data to go through, and they can come up with neat ideas like this. Then the 30 to 50% of the median income, we need 16 units in that price range. And then the 80 to 100 and 80 to 120, we need 18 units in that median housing price, and then 36 units of the 120 high income housing supply. So they slice the data a lot more. And then, of course, we have this black hole of Cowlitz County doesn't necessarily collect the same data, and they don't necessarily do the same analysis of the data, and they're not going to until next year. So even what the consultant did is they basically took, okay, Clark County's methodology and applied it to all of Cowlitz County. If they did it the way Clark County did it, these are the numbers that would come up, and that is we're going to need 584 units in Cowlitz County, and of those we need 150 or 225 0 to 30%, and so the numbers get extremely large when you start breaking it down into those kind of categories, and so it's extremely daunting.
Yeah, so, I mean, are we, looking at those breakdowns, 30% of 83,000 that's less than $25,000. And affordable for that is what? It's like $7,000 a year?
And the reason
Are we
why,
expected to plan for that as well?
yes, we are expected, and to be compliant with GMA, they expect us to do that, which is kind of why we're constantly having these conversations with Commerce, and that is, that's impossible, I can't do that. Can I throw it into the Cowlitz County mixer and argue that, yeah, it's not as clear data, but this is what our current land supply, and kind of run the numbers, and is it totally outrageous? Are we totally screwed, or do we have 3 times as much land as we need? And when they just threw the numbers in the grinder and grind them up. Basically, we came out with, we have enough for the 20-year projected number that we need. It's just going to be messy because we're going to use a lot of those units are going to be built in the next 3 to 5 years. And then what? 15 years of no residential development? The council may love that. Yeah, let's get it over with and no more houses. Or they could come back in 5 years and say, we have to expand the urban growth boundary because we need more housing because we just created 3,000 jobs and we only created 500 homes. It's chaos.
Can-
So,
Sorry, go on, Dave.
is this difference of 1 year to the next always gonna be a factor in doing this? I mean, you know, is Cowlitz County always gonna be a year behind Clark County?
No, no. And we specifically, I fought tooth and nail to get us on the Cowlitz County timeline because we are 5.7% of Cowlitz County's population and we are 0.1% of Clark County's population. And I specifically said, don't give us the grant money. We want to wait for another year. Please put us in Cowlitz County. And they said, nope. The legislature appropriated the money and we have $120,000 for you. Here's 62 this year and 62 next year. And good luck. This is going to be great. But yeah, so for those of you who attended any of the 18-19 comp plan discussion, that was an extremely interesting and informative process. And then in 21, we started doing comp plan amendment discussions because we had a couple applications. And then in 23, I held, I think it was 13 open houses in 2023, and it totally sunk us because we got the grant to start our comp plan update in 2024. So realistically, we've been having open houses, and Donna can attest because she probably attended as many as I have. We've been doing open houses to discuss the comp plan for 3 years nonstop, and the dates are on the website to prove it. And we can't get around this one year thing with Cowlitz County, no matter how much we wanted to. So, but yeah, I was hoping to go in 2023 and get a comp plan update, and then we could wait till 2026. That at least would give us 3 years breathing. But
So, sorry, getting stuck on this, the median income stuff a little bit. You know, could Commerce conceivably say you have to have in your comp plan at least plans for housing that is affordable for someone at less than 30% of the median income?
the other thing, luckily, we've been having conversations with Commerce since our 2018-2019 discussion, because I laid out our problems and issues with fully planning Clark County and partially planning Cowlitz County. What do I do?
I'm sure we've gotten more attention than most other
Yes.
towns our size.
And so they love watching what's going on because it seems like I'm totally drowning. For the 8 years I've been here, I've been totally drowning, and I'm literally standing on the bodies of people who have already drowned, and that's embarrassing. But it's a interesting study because they really don't know what else to tell me to do. Because under growth management, they don't have tools for us.
So, in the past, we picked a growth rate and we planned around that growth rate. We said we're gonna grow by this much and we need to have this many acres available or whatever the case. Really the big wrench in this is the fact that we have to wait for Cowlitz County to decide how much they're gonna grow and how much of a percentage to give us, when why don't we are going to get to negotiate with Cowlitz County, the city is, and basically argue and debate for a portion of that growth. We know we're 5.7% in population. I don't know where we are in economic structure and things, but doesn't it seem a lot more logical for us to set a number and then work toward that number? And, you know, these numbers in the mosh, I don't know. And then the 30% income thing while I'm here, doesn't Longview Housing Authority, and that kind of the people that they serve, and we need to make sure there's zoning appropriate for their stuff
Yes.
as well,
Yes.
you know?
And I love your history, Dave, because you understand that there's these outlying problems that I haven't even gotten into. And Clark County, it is a train of resources that we can't stand in front of, and trying to argue with them to change it from 105 units to 5 units would be a disproportional amount of effort on my part to get Clark County to listen to us. So we really have kind of accepted that, okay, yeah, it is what it is. We can handle 0.1% from them. For Cowlitz County, because they haven't even started, the consultant basically took the State Office of Financial Management. They do a high, medium, and low projection, and we picked the median for Clark County, and that's kind of how we arrived at the Cowlitz County estimate. And ultimately, Cowlitz County is not like Clark County, where they have to plan for the percentage of growth and then spread that out over their jurisdiction. Cowlitz County doesn't have to do that. So they could say, we're gonna have no growth, and they could do a GMA compliant plan. Or they could say, we're gonna have 20% growth, because under GMA, they play by different rules than Clark County does. So I took my known component of Clark County without standing in front of the train, and I took a best professional guess with the consultant for Cowlitz County. And they're not obligated to honor that. They can look at us and say, you already have enough land, you don't need more land.
So the low, medium, high, then you pick medium, and that was a growth rate percentage?
Yes.
And that is?
So we just took the, and I think it's in the SCJ document. I don't remember exactly what the rate is, but it's based upon our known population. So if the county's gonna grow at the medium rate, we're gonna grow at the medium rate, and yeah,
But
whether they grow
we
faster or
can't say
slower.
that's 2.4% or 1.2%, or it's. does
Now we could, because theoretically, we've already built into our model with the median growth pattern, accommodating the Clark County 105 units. So we could slow our growth and lower our densities, but the question is commerce gonna throw us under the train? Because now we're just being difficult.
So I'm not talking about Clark County at all.
Yep.
Let's leave Clark County alone.
Yep.
What's Clark County's growth rate? Does anybody know? What's their projected growth rate?
I have I think the numbers are in here as part of the SCJ.
Well,
but
I tried to download the whole package here, and I got November's packet, so I don't have my data.
Oh.
But, so, the point I'm gathering is it says in the GMA that we will work with the county to establish our portion.
Yeah.
So we need to have a portion to settle with them over. And trying to figure out what they're doing. Let's figure out what we're doing, and then tell them we're gonna need another 100 acres or whatever. We got, you know, I don't think that's unreasonable to county commissioners or county planners or anybody else. I think that we
Yeah.
can't just
Yes.
can't just unplan and wait for them and then say, oh, we're going to be short real estate. We can say we knew in 2025 that in 5 years, we're gonna need this much real estate, so we need to make that statement to them. And that way they allocate, and then we know the annexations that need to happen can happen and everything.
Yes.
So,
Yes, so I understand exactly what you're saying, and we are positioned to do that. For Clark County, because they are a year ahead, they told us 185 people, 105 units. But we didn't push back on that because there's no more Clark County for us to include in our urban growth boundary. And we were forced to take the 105. We voluntarily took it because we have all of Clark County that we could include. The problem is we can't apply that logic to Cowlitz County because Cowlitz County is not going to play ball like that. They're playing a totally different game, and they don't have to do the calculations, the GMA calculations that Clark
but
County
the
did.
GMA says they have to discuss it with us, that we have input. The GMA says,
Yes. And
unless Google was wrong, the
Well,
GMA says that
so-
we have input in what our portion is.
So we have to be consistent with Cowlitz County, and Cowlitz County is going to look at us and say, yes, your urban growth boundary is not changing, therefore we met the bar of being consistent with Cowlitz County. Now, whether we plan for more units, that's not really in their ability to control. They control our footprint because they control our urban growth boundary. And if they don't want to expand the urban growth boundary, they can tell us too bad.
And they can tell us you didn't plan for it, so we're not gonna do it.
Yes.
So we kinda need to plan for it, so we can ask for it.
And I would agree with you, except for the 2018-2019 process where we talked about our 7 growth scenarios, including expanding the urban growth boundary, and the Cowlitz County Deputy Prosecuting Attorney and the Public Works Director, or the Community Development Director, came to the Planning Commission meeting and said, you cannot plan for expanding your urban growth boundary because your comp plan would not be consistent with the Cowlitz County plan. You need to change the Cowlitz County plan first, and then you change the city.
So we can have a goal in
Yes.
to negotiate with the county to expand our urban growth boundary. I'm not saying change the comp plan map.
Okay.
I'm saying we
Okay.
can have whatever numbers we want here and say, these are we have to establish our need. And we have to establish our need based on our need, not what we think the county is gonna give us.
Yes, yes.
So,
You're-
we don't have to plan it all within we can plan everything within the city limits for the next 5 years, but this is a 20-year plan.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And that is why I specifically pointed out and why it's in in this letter from SCJ Alliance, why they talk about these numbers for projects that don't exist. Because we have this growth capacity that we have to accommodate, and the land may or may not be available, but looking at the projects that are in the hopper, we can foresee that a huge chunk of that 600 units is going to occur in the next 5 years. And technically, the first 5 years are part of the 20-year comp plan, and the fact that we're totally gonna be in hot water in 5 years, GMA doesn't worry about that. As long as we have a 20-year supply, if we use it all this year, it just means we'll have no more growth for the next 19 years. That's bad planning, but I'm in this box where I gotta do it this year and Cowlitz County doesn't. And so I would love to have that conversation. Yeah, so I fully recognize that, yeah, it looks like I'm doing a half-assed planning effort because I'm on a timeline that is not optimum for us to do good planning. And next year, Cowlitz County can tell us to pack sand because you just convinced Commerce that you're good to go for 20 years.
right. So I'm,
Can we, I mean, can we convince Commerce that we aren't good to go for 20 years?
Well, we can update our comprehensive plan every year. And yeah, considering that I've been doing this 2023, 2024, 2025, I'll be doing it at Cowlitz County in 2026, which means we'll probably be back here doing this again in 2027.
Well,
It's
I guess I just
never-ending
wondered,
planning.
what happens if the conclusion of this housing analysis is that, no, we don't have enough land? And we, like, what are we expected to do with our comp plan this year if that's the conclusion?
So theoretically, we would be found to be out of compliance with the Growth Management Act, and Commerce would essentially put us on notice that we need to make the effort to come into compliance. Clark County's dirty planning secret is they've been out of compliance with the GMA since I virtually got here in 2000, because they expanded the urban growth boundaries and the cities annexed their entire urban growth boundary. And so the state Growth Management Hearings Board came out and said, Clark County, you can't do that. You're out of compliance with GMA. And Clark County said, what can I do? It's already part of Camas. It's already part of Washougal. I can't unring the bell. How do I plan for city property? And they've been kind of fighting with one hand tied behind their back since I literally got there in 1999. So,
that's,
yeah.
I mean, but that's not our issue, right? Like, we're
Nope.
not, we haven't, annexed more than Commerce wants us to, right? Like, that's not our, where I'm getting at is if we go through this process and it says, you need to expand your urban growth boundary, and we say, and then, would that then be some leverage to say, hey, Cowlitz County, we have been told by Commerce that we're out of compliance and we have to expand our UGB? And, how does that play out? How does that escalate things?
Yeah, so again, the responsibility, the workload for carrying that water is going to be on us to try and make that argument going forward. But we are going to have other tools in our belt that we can pursue. So you'll also remember that during all of this long-range planning conversations that have lasted essentially 7 years, we also had conversations about increasing densities and changes to the RCW for the duplexes on corner lots, plus accessory dwelling units, plus increased densities, and trying to streamline the process so we reduce bureaucracy. And that stuff went through the Planning Commission. You guys came up with stuff that you liked. If you remember, I think there were 19 options. We came up with 9 that we really liked for Woodland. It went to the City Council. The City Council did a first reading, but they didn't do a second reading. So I have these tools locked and loaded in my belt that if we get through this process, or if we run into bumps, I'll be able to say, well, we explored this discussion and we can reduce bureaucracy, which will make it cheaper to build housing, which should reduce price, plus we can increase densities by allowing duplexes on corner lots and accessory dwelling units so that seniors can age in place and have rental income on their property and stay home, or have caregivers move in with them, or kids move in with the parents. We have these tools that are ready, so we might not have to argue about urban growth boundary expansion for 10 years.
And that seems like an all right outcome, but what is the escalating? So we're not Clark County. We probably don't have the clout that a Clark County does with Commerce. What is there? If we are found to be out of compliance, what is the sort of escalating sanction on us?
Well, one of the benefits that we have going for us is we've had this concerted effort with very little progress for years and years and years. And so we have these conversations and they see my phone number and they kind of roll their eyes and answer the phone, what's going on? And so really when push comes to shove, if we're out of compliance, it's not like they're going to cut off our funding, because they understand we're in an impossible position. And it's not like we just popped up on their radar and tried to torpedo them and we've been lying to them the whole time. No, they understand what's going on, and they basically have said, yeah, there's no tool to transfer your Clark County density, but just do it. And we're not gonna throw you to the wolves just because you're doing something unconventional, because nobody else is gonna try and emulate us, because we're just not like everybody else.
I think maybe we're starting to get lost in the weeds a little bit, but is there a scenario where we can be compelled to, adopt some of those density changes?
If we could be compatible with what?
Compelled to, like,
Oh,
where Commerce
compelled
can say,
to.
you actually have to change your code in this.
Yes, theoretically, they could compel us to adopt these increased densities and these bureaucracy reductions. They are already in state RCWs, and we are already out of compliance. And when they call me and say, why aren't you in compliance? My comment is, I'm in the middle of this conversation. And by the time we're done with this conversation, if we're embarrassed enough, the council is going to say, yeah, let's adopt that stuff because you brought it to us 2 years ago. And for whatever reason, the council members who are no longer here torpedoed the process, and it kind of got stuck, and it seemed to work just fine. Let's bring it up at the next council meeting and talk about it again. And they understand that, yeah, forcing me to spend my ammo now versus waiting until this kind of comes to a head, and maybe it's what we need to get Cowlitz County excited about giving us additional urban growth boundary, because now we have all these new tools in our code that we didn't have in 1819. And under RCWs, they're obligated to ensure that we are complying with the GMA and to get us motivated to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, this is obviously a big conversation. I think tonight maybe it's probably time to move on.
Okay, so if I'm belaboring that point, I apologize. We'll move on.
No, it's obviously it's a tricky one.
Yep.
And it is kind of like it's driving all of this, right? Like, so it is at the crux. So I don't begrudge spending time talking about it, but
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because it really does kind of poison the water for a lot of the later conversation, because as you read through this, it's kind of like, yeah, we could do better, and maybe you want to rewrite some of these chapters as if the assumption, and that's where we're going to focus on over the next 6 months, to pick a chapter and go with it.
Have we got any information from the school district on what kind of growth rate they're planning for?
We do not, but they just updated their school plan, and they updated their capital facilities plan, and the capital facilities chapter has been sent to them for them to update. And they are in another interesting situation in that they expand into Clark County, Cowlitz County as well. And so they get impact fees from the city of Woodland. They get impact fees from houses in Clark County, but they don't get impact fees from Cowlitz County. So again, because Cowlitz County can either build 1,000 houses or 50 houses, the school district totally has no information because they haven't started their planning process.
why did they expand into Clark County if they can't get impact fees from it?
The school district includes up the hills on the other side of the river, and Hayes Road. So it is in the school district, and they collect school impact fees like we do.
Oh, from even in Clark County?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
Yeah,
I
they do
misunderstood that.
all school districts, and
Okay.
each district has their own rate.
All right.
Okay, so given that, I wanted to also point out that as new documents are going up on the webpage, each of the individual chapters are being labeled, and kind of the associated documents that might go with that are on there. So the first chapter, one of the chapters that's up there is the land use chapter. And as you look at it, there are going to be comments. Actually, this is a bad example. It is formatted in this funky term because as the consultant was going through and making changes or comments as they updated something, this is now compliant with the or the RCWs, or they have questions, and this is the same table, but it's updated with current numbers. So you can see the consultant's comments, and when I'm reviewing this, if I have a response to their comment, I will put it underneath this, and then Public Works will weigh in. But it allows you to kind of see the progression of the consultant's opinion, and they actually went through this document, and where it said 466 manholes, there's now 647 manholes. I can get you the tracked change copies, and the original ones I put up there had the track changes where it crossed out the old number, put in the new number, but it was extremely confusing to the people that I had talked to. So I just went ahead and did a clean copy, and now what you see is the new text. If you want to see the old text and the new text with the changes, I can send that to you, but for the average citizen, that's way too much information. I just want them to read it the first time and understand what's in there without the confusion back and forth, the 10 years between the two numbers and why it's there. So each of these chapters is in there. And when I said at the last meeting, we are not going to go through this change by change or section by section, let's talk about that real quick. So the economic development, I'm actually really excited about this one because they gave us a lot of new analysis of the numbers and jobs and that kind of stuff. So you can look in here at those new analysis numbers and the distribution of where our employees are coming from and where our...
And how did they find all that out?
So all of that is available from like GIS sources, and you can ascribe to websites where they track 1 million cell phones, and the cell phones know where you're home because you're there from 10 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock in the morning. And so their algorithms can figure out where you eat and where you're most likely to eat, let alone what's your favorite movie theater and where you stop for during the day at work. Yeah, so that's what this is based on. And the amount of data analysis that they can do, it's just scary. But so yeah, so this is an interesting one because what it says is the majority of employees live north and east or south and west. That's like literally how much data that they have out there that they can mine to do this with.
I've never seen a windrose used that way. That's pretty cool. It is creepy.
And then I point out that at the bottom of kind of all that description of what's characterizes our community, the important stuff looking forward is the goals and policies. And this is important because this is really kind of the heart of the comprehensive plan because it's what we want going forward. And I point this out because each chapter has its own analysis, which is kind of a snapshot looking backwards. The goals and policy is what we want to do going forward. And I point this out because each of these, the track changes, has messy comments in here. But the consultant created this giant spreadsheet that we presented last time. And this is super helpful because it takes all of those goals and policies, puts them in a single document. And you can see here that this first box is, it's an existing element of the land use. It's goal number 1, land use number 1, and then the policy to implement this goal. So it's land use goal 1, and the first policy number 1.1, second policy 1.2. So it lets you kind of know that it's under this goal These are the policies to help us get there.
Are we gonna be able to, like, all of us look at those and make our notes and then like have a round table on that?
Yes, so that we, I think, can talk about how we want to get there. Now, the one thing that I was going to show, and that is there are columns as you keep going out, and that is comments by the city. So these columns are kind of comments by the consultant, and the consultant says this is still okay, or if there's no comment, it means it's okay. And they might say this is recommended because it's compliant with the new goal of comprehensive plan or climate change policy, or RCW this, and this recommends that you add. We recommend these changes. So there's existing, and they're kind of color coded for you to look through. But it's a lot easier than having 8 different or 9 different chapters that you're trying to flip back and forth and make your notes. And so as I'm going through here, I also added another column from all of our open houses. I got a bunch of input as, what do you think of this goal? And some people said, well, why are we doing this? And the city shouldn't be doing this. This is a state issue. So all of those comments are going in a column. And as I am updating that stuff, I'll try and get that done before the next meeting. So all of the public input to date will be on here. So if you've gone through the first 3 pages, send those to me, and I'll add them under comments by the city. Or I could add another column, comments by planning commission. So that way you'll be able to see what the consultant says, what I say as the city, what the public has weighed in on, and maybe what the planning commission has weighed on. Since you technically are part of the city review, maybe I'll just make it a different color. So that way you can differentiate between what staff's opinion or staff's comment, staff's interpretation versus planning commission comment on that separately. So this Excel spreadsheet is going to continue to change, and as I save a new version, you'll notice that when you see it on the website, it'll have a date 03/18/25, that's March 18th. And so the next version will be 020 or 026 and 04/01/25. So that way everybody, you can look at it and say, oh, somebody's added more comments, and you can go in and maybe check it over again. But you can feed me your comments anytime you want, and I'll add it to the sheet so that everybody sees it. But I guess, how you want to manage that public conversation at this meeting. I could shut up now and you can start going through it one by one, or yeah, maybe you just want to talk about the land use ones, or certain chapters you just want to check off those, they're fine, and focus on how you want to do that.
I don't have the newest spreadsheet. I've just got the one you gave us last week, so it doesn't have any of those public comments on it. So I don't have visibility into that at this moment.
The big chapter that we do not have updated yet is the transportation. Everything else looks like it's pretty close to having a clean chapter up on the website for you to take a look at. So really we could say the lion's share of what you want to read and comment on is going to be up there probably within the next week or so. And then it's getting down to what parts of that Excel spreadsheet do you want to dive in, and how deep is entirely going to be up to you guys. I'll take your direction on that.
All right, so what are you thinking of for tonight?
For tonight?
Yeah,
Oh.
for our workshop discussion tonight.
So really, I think that's up to you. I
Okay.
put those on the agenda to identify and a centrally located case for the person, the average person who's not looking at the website.
Okay.
Now it's also attached to the agenda. So between last agenda and this agenda, most of the documents have been attached to an agenda. But really, if you're working off the website, we could go home now and you can start on your homework, or we can start your homework right now and be here till 10 o'clock without breaking PC rules.
All right, let's maybe split the difference on that to some degree, somewhere in between anyhow. I guess I'm inclined to start just by surveying the commissioners. If any of you have seen anything that you want to talk about immediately, or so far.
I started off at the very beginning and went down a little bit until I
Okay.
just got bored with it and stopped.
How long did that take?
Because you can't do it for
Yeah.
too long before your brain says, okay, I gotta do something else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, this just general comments. There's a lot of comments that they make that I don't know what I'm supposed to say about that. Right? It's like an okay, that's a good observation. Does that mean that I have strong feelings of changing the wording of the goal? No. Right, I mean, I don't know if that's a substantive comment on my behalf to give you that, right? But I didn't have a lot of strong feelings against or for a lot of the comments. I did see that they wanted to combine things quite a bit. They're like, this could be combined elsewhere, right? And what I was thinking on those is, I don't know how you or us are supposed to use these goals in a way. If a goal has 3 different items within it, if you don't meet one of those 3, do you not meet that goal? Does that, you see what I'm saying? I mean, do we want them to be separate because of that?
So, can I comment on that? 'Cause
Yeah,
I had the
please.
same feelings
Please.
about combine this with that, but the goal or the policy standalone has more gravity alone. And there's times when you're testifying in front of a hearings examiner or something like that, you want to be able to say, the city has set this as a goal, and this project meets this goal, or this project goes against this goal. But when it's combined with others, then it is
Right.
it's muddied up.
Now you have to combine all 5.
Yeah, so sometimes it just is a stronger statement when it's, and that was, I probably got about as far as you did on that.
Okay, good, I
And,
thought I was oversharing. Travis stinking his stink eye.
Well, and to that point,
It gets pretty dry.
Code is dry. I mean, this is not much different than code.
no,
You know.
and to that point, like, I'm not sure what combining them actually accomplishes. Clarity-wise?
You're paying a whole bunch of money for a consultant. They gotta show some.
Yeah, and that's,
stuff,
and I can't,
and-
you know, we can't begrudge them that, because that's the world we live in, but,
And I had Travis print me the comprehensive plan that we are actually
yeah.
updating, so I could go back and look at the whole topic together and, you know, because, anyway, I
Yeah.
kinda need to see the whole picture,
Yeah,
but
well,
that,
that makes sense, to me. I think, you know, there are probably some cases where, you know, having, like, there are probably redundant elements, and that's fine, but yeah, I take your point that smashing ideas together isn't necessarily gonna be advantageous for us.
and we don't have to. You know,
Yeah.
that's their idea. We
Yeah.
don't have to.
And we're not printing out a ton of hard copies of these, so saving a little paper isn't really worthwhile goal. But, you know, just, you know, I did make my way through the chapters that were part of the agenda and had, you know, very minor comments and thoughts. But I'm wondering if maybe, before I go there, what were you thinking of, Travis?
We could take a look at the chapters, and you could potentially maybe eliminate some of those ones that you don't necessarily think you need to dive into, like the utilities section or the capital facilities section that might warrant more time versus utilities, and whether or not you feel you can influence Clark Public Utilities or the school district or cable providers here in town. That you may not get much result out of talking through those goals and policies. So maybe you just want to pick one or two for the next meeting, and each of you can come prepared to, don't talk about all of them. Which one is your biggest pet peeve? And that will be 5 items. You'll be lucky to get through that in a 2-3 hour meeting if you have 5 pet peeves, and the other ones are just like, yeah, I can live with that. If you decide not to combine, that's fine, but focus on what's most important to you rather than starting with the utility chapter and never getting to chapter 2 because you're arguing about Ziply fiber and what the goal should be for fiber optic.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. So, this stuff is gonna be
Yeah.
eye-watering, and there's sort of no getting around that, but.
Now you can always come to my office and argue with me one-on-one for day after day, and we can go through it page by page. But that might be better time spent with one-on-one than.
Yeah, and I think.
Your dedication is admirable, Travis.
That's why I'm using the spreadsheet, because it's, I want you.
Travis and I took over the library one day. We ended up there together. So, in our capital facilities deal, it talks about the wastewater treatment plant and it referring to, in 1999 city facilities plan, the city estimated for a growth rate of 5%. What percent are we gonna put in there this time?
That's a good question, and that is driven by engineering calculations based upon the use, and that is where we rely on the engineering consultants, because if we're talking about population, they're talking about production, because you get one bottling plant, your water consumption goes through the roof, but your sewer never changes.
Well, the annual growth rate they're talking about was people.
Yes.
I mean, I took that class, I can give you that number. If
Oh, there.
you just draw a line.
Yeah.
I mean, it's on a different scale, but it's just drawing a line.
Yeah. Yeah, and we could dive into that detail, but on the other hand, you could ask to be assigned to the Public Works Committee that works on the update of the water sewer plan when we come around to that.
I just know that in 1999, the city council said we're gonna plan to grow by 5%. And I, don't wanna be hung up on that forever, but this system, we're planning to grow to, like when Prince changed his name to non-pronounceable.
What a great analogy. I can't wait to see what this is about.
I just.
Yeah, it's
not
a mystery, it's a black box, right?
It is, and I don't know if I just feel like I need some meat and potatoes here, and it's.
That is that number is just easy to understand. And for us and anybody who reads the comp plan, and not having that right now is kind of, it does, yeah, feel like
So
we
I
don't have
think-
the ground under our feet.
And that's where I think, as in, we should create it. Just.
Yes, so I can say that the last update we did for the comprehensive plan, and they updated, I want to say, the water plan in 2020. It started in 2020, and I think they adopted it in 2022, and it was consistent with the number we used for the 2019 update. So they did bring that into compliance. The sewer plan hasn't been updated since 2017, and it is still kind of based on the 2015 number, but theoretically it is also within the medium and the low OFM position population projections. And part of that is because, especially with the sewer, the capital investments come at much bigger numbers, both for capacity and investment. So in other words, the small investments like the pump stations they don't move the needle that much. But they have to know 10 years ahead of time when they need to add a new cell at the wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so they do bear that in mind, but really the comp plan kind of dictates that. So the next update for the sewer plan will be consistent with the numbers that SCJ is using from the OFM projections at this point.
And
So
the OFM just talks in medium or low? Just medium?
So they do a high, medium, and low. What they also do is they use the census, and then each city reports every year. We report how many building permits for new units are started and how many of them are finished. So, for example, that number I threw out of the 25 units over 4 years, last year they applied for 50 units, but only 25 of them got finished. So there's 25, 26 outstanding from last year, plus they've turned in another 48 so far this year. So this year's number is actually 75, but they're submitting the applications. They may actually get half of them constructed, and if none of them sell, they'll just hold on to their permits. And OFM actually looks at permits and occupancy per unit in the community. So the most accurate date is 2021 because they use the 2020 census. And then they do community-based reality checks every year. And by the time we get to 2029, it's 9 years of guessing on top of the census, but 2030 will be the next census and they'll get a reality check again. And during 2020, it's kind of odd that we had no new construction of residences in 2020, and our population grew by 90 people, just simply because the census said there's more people living here, even though it's not due to building permit. It's just 90% of drift over the previous 9 years of counting permits. And OFM, they have a reality check every 10 years.
And with all that, they're not able to give us a growth rate, other than,
And I don't have it off the top of my head right now, but I can find it out and send it to you.
okay.
Yeah.
I think that would be good guidance, especially if, for nothing else than kind of a sanity check to check some of these other numbers against. So I would like to run through these survey results a little bit, but before that, do we have enough? I'm inclined to, before I start assigning people to subcommittees for a chapter, say maybe, just what your interest is drawn to, try to spend some time on it, and that's going to be relative. Maybe you're not actually interested in any of it, and that's fine, but what's less uninteresting, I guess. Yes, Rob?
Can I just say what I want?
Absolutely.
I want to do the surveys. I've already started looking at them.
The survey results that are on the agenda?
Yep.
So that's, is that in the, I don't think that's a part of the comp plan, is it?
It is not.
Oh.
Okay.
But it is input for you to consider as part of
Yeah.
that.
So I think, hold that thought, because we'll talk about that. I do want to talk about that before we leave tonight.
Okay.
So good. But yeah, I guess let's see how we do this next month with just kind of choose your own adventure, and if we all end up picking the same chapter, then we'll.
Dave has the table of contents by chapter.
Does he? All right.
If you wanna peruse the.
Yeah,
chap-
why don't I
Good.
just have a
There's
look
the
at
good book
these.
right there.
The good book. All right. Just so everybody's got just a little.
And so we haven't gotten all of the elements yet, and we don't do some of the elements, cause like Parks is using something from
Last 2023.
still have a park board?
I believe we do, yes. They're run through Public Works.
That runs through Public Works?
Yep.
They haven't had a meeting in a long time.
Sometime.
I
Okay.
will take your word on that.
Are there any other chapters that we're not gonna open?
We won't have anything to do with schools.
What's that? That's not even on
Which
here.
is part of the capital facilities chapter.
Schools is?
Yep.
Is a subchapter of the capital facilities.
Okay, so I'm just gonna run through, so we got an introduction and community vision, public involvement, land use, housing, economic development, transportation, skipping Parks and Rec, capital facilities, energy and utilities, environment, and growth management. So, I guess if any of that is calling anyone's name, I'd say start there. Start with whatever seems the most
I
interesting.
will, I don't know if it's done yet, but, utilities is kind of my thing.
Okay.
And,
So, if I can't do the survey,
Mhm.
I wanna do housing, the number 4,
Okay.
since I'm already doing that.
Okay. And I will say, before we get too much further in this, you know, claiming these is great. That doesn't mean if you didn't claim it, you can't look at it. So, by all means, if you're interested, still do that. But, you know, maybe focus more effort on something else. Any of those calling to you, Brian?
I'll take whatever anybody doesn't want.
So accommodating. All right, Sharon?
Environment,
Which one?
environment,
ooh, that's gonna be a hard one.
oh, really?
No.
Okay, I mean, is there anything you feel like aligns with your expertise better than any of the others, Brian?
What have we got left?
We've got public involvement, land use.
Well, public involvement's done, right, for the most part. We can kind of,
Okay, let's get that one.
they decided how that was gonna happen long ago, so.
Land use, economic development, transportation, capital facilities, growth management.
Did you mention that you and Travis were already hashing out the capital facilities? Or was that not what you were saying?
What?
I'm like I'm trying to assign you stuff.
No,
I thought if you've already discussed it at length, maybe you've already dived
Actually,
into it.
capital facilities is just one of those elements that, goes to the guys in the plant and the people that crunch those numbers and everything. All we could do with that is take the old numbers and times them by 1.5 and, you know, something like that. But those guys, you know, there's a lot more to technology changes and a lot of stuff happens there. So the capital facilities planning commission's never really been a part of, you know, that just kind of gets handed over. So kind of like schools. Schools does their own thing.
Yeah, it's
Right.
interesting stuff, but there's not a ton of work.
And the library is in capital facilities and,
Is it?
yeah.
It is, yeah.
The capital facilities might be one where you can review that on your own and submit me comments, because your conversation may not build on new ideas that you just don't benefit from. Is there much to wrestle on about the library?
No.
Probably not.
No.
Okay. Well,
There's economic development still hanging out.
economic development still hanging out, land use still hanging out.
Do we have to pick 2?
No, you don't have to pick any, but, it could potentially be helpful we got a lot to get through, and it's hard to, unfortunately, if we're not looking at this outside of meetings, I think it's just never gonna get done, so.
So, I have a question.
Okay.
I don't wanna add work to you in any stretch of the imagination, but is this consultant able to crunch that GIS data and maybe identify more properties that are available for redevelopment? Because when I picture things that have been done in town, and I'm one of those guys that drives around going, oh, that one never comes up for sale. I might buy that and split it into 4 lots. And there's those out there. And for instance, my son's house on CC Street was built in 1907. But that lot was divided up and 3 other homes were built around it. It's still there. So it's not like you have to think about tearing the house down to do that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So we really need to consider that was a regular market value house, that the land didn't have much value at the time either, but it was very dividable, and so there's, I don't know, I think that data is kind of thin on the and I think that's one of the more important areas we need to look at. So I don't know if there's something this consultant can do and crunch that without adding work to you.
Well,
And
so
I don't have the big Google Earth GIS
Did you
deal.
say that the 50,000 was the threshold they
I-
had for the structure?
I want to say
So
I've
there's
read that
plenty
somewhere.
of stuff that's redevelopable that's over that 50. Is
Yeah.
maybe that's what they're missing? Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yes, so we could ask them to do that reanalysis at 75 or 90 or 100, 150. We could set that number in multiple places.
Can we look at houses that have a lot? Will the GIS do this?
Yes.
A lot that's larger than 20,000 square feet and 1 house,
Yes.
and find out how many properties there are like that, because that's almost a half acre. And,
Yes.
how many places in town have,
It should, yeah, that should be relatively easy for
okay.
GIS. If it's
Maybe
got all
this
the parcel
consultant
data.
has even better ideas for looking at that, but just,
Yeah, because that does seem, and it was probably just, that's like a first pass that they did, right? Like,
Yes.
pretty crude, and
Yeah.
refining it does make some sense to me.
Yes, so the one thing I would like to point out is we can do that, and that would be a very easy exercise to ask them to do. And my planner brain goes to the next step, and that is, okay, once we have that additional information, looking at our analysis, basically what it says is we have enough land to cover our projected growth. And what we might discover is we have enough land plus 5%. Does that make a difference? Well, from a policy point of view, it might. Which leads me to ask the question, why don't we just focus on the policy issues of, if you had that information, Dave, how would it change you think our goals and policies should change? Because that would be a really interesting conversation, and if I'm gonna spend 5 hours on this, I would rather have a 5-hour conversation with you about how to improve our policies to encourage properties that are 20,000 square feet or less. Let's create a density tool that will encourage redevelopment, or multiple ADUs, or a duplex on 20,000 square feet instead of just duplexes on corner lots. That is something where you and I can produce tangible policy recommendations without necessarily crunching
without
those
knowing
numbers.
if we need the policy, or, that,
Yes, and I think that you and I might be able to have a more interesting conversation with more planning commission members based on, that's a really interesting idea. If if the data showed this, what are the ideas? What gets you excited? Well, let's get everybody excited about
Yeah,
that.
well, let's,
Yeah.
you know, let's get the data and, you know,
Yeah,
find out. We're paying
'Cause-
somebody a lot of money to
'cause part of me-
provide us with some stuff.
because part of me, what I worry about in that is, if it's gonna make a 1% difference, then there's gonna be members in this community who's gonna say, why bother? Now you're just making up fantasies, cause it's only gonna be 1%
Yeah, but if we can say
difference.
we've identified, you know,
Yeah.
several properties where, you know, there's, without it driving street to street
Yeah,
to do it,
Yeah.
I just, if the GIS can get us better data,
yeah,
then,
yep, I can ask them to run that numbers. As a matter of fact, the new information, based upon your email, you would ask for some of that underlying data. So I talked to the consultant who ran that data, so now I have a contact and an actual name of who to talk to, rather than the planner who talks to the number cruncher. I now know the number cruncher directly, so I'll call
Good.
them. Yeah,
good. Yeah, I had like, that was like a 4-question email, and I still have some outstanding questions there, but not about the comp plan.
now
So-
you have 8 questions.
What are you thinking, boss? What do you think? I think it's a good idea that if everybody microanalyzes a section and then comes back and reports back, that's good.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be the end of it. I think that's a decent place to start.
I'll do land use and, how many more do we have to delegate out?
We've got, what do we have, how much, what's the deadline we're working on? 6 months?
2, I'll take land use and
So we have April, May, and June, but you are going to have some rezone requests on your April agenda.
Okay. Okay, I think that's a good place to start. I guess I'll try transportation. That's probably more than I can do alone, but
We can
That's
always,
gonna be a popular one.
we can always do a mid-month workshop too. I mean, that's kind of, we're used to that when we do the comp plan.
okay. Yeah, maybe can we, yeah, that's gonna get harder for me in April, cause I got some travel for work. But I also don't need to be, we don't have to have everybody to do that, so,
So, can I bring up something?
yeah, please.
Legislature is in session till April 27th.
Okay. I don't think that's gonna impact this
Impacts
process
me.
for us. It impacts you, okay. Okay, that's good to know too. So maybe let's see how this goes. Fantastic, thank you.
You have one of those?
I don't, but I'll go online and look at it.
All right, so
Travis
let's,
gets a printer back from the remodel.
I
He can
pass
print
that out because there are other open house opportunities where you could potentially meet and have that conversation without having to do additional meetings. But I can do additional meetings if you would prefer.
okay, and so that would have to be, okay, so because these are announced, it's okay if we have if 3 of us talk about this?
Yep.
Okay. All right, I like that. So, let's see, when's the next one of those is April 7th, which is Monday. No, that's the city council meeting. Sorry, next open house is April 14th, which is also Monday. And then our next meeting is 3 days later.
17th,
Yeah.
April 17th.
Which doesn't give us a, yeah. I'm gonna be out of town April 14th. But again, that's not super important. I guess maybe try to dive into this over the next 2 weeks and kind of in 2 weeks kind of, I don't know, maybe put on your calendar a reminder to just kind of like think about where you're at, and if you think you need another meeting, or if you think you just I don't know, aren't making the progress, or if it's too much to chew up, and we'll just, you know, send if you have any thoughts about it whatsoever, maybe
You could also send your comments to me, and I will continue to update that Excel spreadsheet so you can see what progress is being made.
okay, yeah, that sounds good too. Okay, it's gonna be a bit of a learning experience, I think, as we go along, but hopefully we can get it sorted out in time. All right, I want to get everybody out of here, but can we want to run through these survey results real quick? Did everybody have a chance to look through those? Robin, I know you had some thoughts about that.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I've highlighted, kind of what I thought was interesting. Some of it's just not really helpful. Maintaining a safe community, I mean, you know, what do you do with that? Improving infrastructure and services, that's something we can do. So I saw different things that were important, and some things were just something people liked.
Yeah. Well, I will say, so how long was this survey out, Travis? It's quite a while, right?
I'm sorry?
How long?
Yeah, so it's been out all of last year, and it is still
Still
on
open.
the city's website. If you go to the city's website, there is a red banner at the top of it that encourages you. So it is still available. Anybody can take it.
Okay.
So it's right there,
But
right
this-
when you open the page up.
Okay. Will this fun sort of summary that was put together, is there any way to have updates to that, or is that?
So they've only received 3 additional since January, so
Okay.
they did not.
Well, I think, you know, potentially, if you're feeling a little bit lost looking through this stuff, there is maybe some information to pull out of here for like what the community's thinking about. This is obviously not everybody, so it's not set in stone, but I was surprised and encouraged and a little concerned about some of these, but overall I think it was really interesting and kind of cool. Anybody else have any takeaways from that?
I thought it was a better survey than some I've seen done. I don't know, just kind of more down to earth questions and things on it this time,
Yeah.
you know, but none of the data is really surprising, other than one thing that stood out to me is that the large amount of people that are concerned about wildfires. And I don't know, because at least they did share where people are from, and maybe the people that are most concerned about wildfires are
On the fringe.
living up in the woods or something, but
Woodland, California.
Yeah, it is. Karen, you
You know, I mean, I guess the thing is, people who have strong opinions are the ones that take these surveys, and
That's true. There's always going to be some selection bias in some of
Yeah.
these, and so I guess take it with a grain of salt. But yeah, I don't know.
it was interesting though.
Yeah, more sidewalks, like that was
Huge, apparently.
yeah. That's as much as there is consensus in here, I think, you know, things like that, apart from, you know, traffic being an issue. All right, I think, well, I guess I did have one other real quick thought that just, so like my new, a relatively new job has sort of put one thing that we've talked about a fair amount in a little bit different light for me. And that's kind of, it's a little bit part of the, population growth versus infrastructure, but also, ways to get out of town quickly
Yes.
in the event of an earthquake.
Or a flood.
Or flood.
Or a flood, or
And
the combination of those two following a dam breach. It's all a computer model, and you gotta take those with a grain of salt. But in also an exceedingly unlikely event of dam failure upriver. It's an hour for the flood wave to kind of get to town, and that's a 2-foot rise in the water level, and then 2 hours for a 45-foot rise in water level. And 2 hours is not a ton of time to
Did
get.
you say 45 or 425?
45.
45.
And that's primarily a function of it, this flood wave kind of hitting a bunch of friction at this part in town, the water backing up and getting pretty deep. So something to, again, this is not something to like stay awake at night over, because this is a very unlikely scenario.
They already flooded.
Sure. Yeah. Fortunately, the floods we get, typically we've got more than 2 hours notice,
Yes.
which is helpful. But yeah, I guess
You're
another data point.
regulating them and you're up close and personal, so I'm glad that you're saying it's an unlikely event.
It is. Yeah. It's pretty hard
It
to fail a
happened.
concrete dam. It does happen, but it's not easy.
But there's not, yes, I mean, we need more than one way across town, but there's not an easy answer to that.
Yeah.
When
No,
Meriwether was being applied for and everything, I tried to get a exit over Scott Hill in with that over to whatever that Hillsdale or whatever it is
Hillsdale.
which is actually a private road,
Yeah.
but they had enough land to kind of get there, and I tried to get them to get there, and I asked for them to sharpen their pencil on things, but that was a split vote, and it went the other way. But there's no reason to not add it as a goal to the right section,
Yeah.
and have even just to have a policy to try to plan.
Yeah, and
So
And where it gets a little tricky for me is I think, probably like the lowest hanging fruit on it is probably less about, stuff, infrastructure, and more about kind of human factors and planning and communication and, public outreach. So anyway, it's just been on my mind professionally, but also,
So
it's a big deal in town.
is the main route really just Lewis River Road? I mean, is that really all we have? And how many people are upriver to get?
Well, I mean, yeah, this gets complicated. This is a bigger conversation than we have time for. But you don't need to get downriver. You just need to get higher.
yeah.
Yeah, that was what we had planned.
Yeah.
If something happened.
And having some organization around that prevents, could prevent bottlenecks and
So who plans that?
yeah, that gets.
DEM, the Department of Emergency Management.
So Cowlitz County does have an emergency management plan, and actually we have what they call is sand table exercises, I think they call them, where we actually go out to the dam and work with all the emergency services agencies and Pacific Corps, because they have they do all the monitoring, they have all the weather data fed into their center. That's how they manage their pool level. And actually, at the last meeting, we were having a discussion and we brought up Woodland's flood elevation. They didn't even realize that we had a flood wall. And those holes in 503 where the flood wall, you put I-beams in those with railroad ties between them, you throw a tarp over it, and that's the waterproof barrier to keep the water out of the diking district. They didn't even realize that that existed. And so
Well, I think beyond that, I think there's probably a substantial population in town that also doesn't know that. And probably fewer people know that those things are in Dale Boone's barn, and he's well up Green Mountain Road.
yeah.
Depending on what time of year this thing happens. Anyway,
And you could go to Mount St. Helens depending on the time of the year. Or you could go to Amboy into northern Clark County, but it depends on what dam is having problems, right?
yeah. So this is, I don't know that this is necessarily totally a comp plan discussion, but I think part of it probably is. And but I don't know exactly where it would fit. Anyway, final thoughts about anything at all? Okay. Well, thanks once again, everybody. This is sort of, the time in our service that is a little bit more work. So, I guess thanks for signing up, and thanks for getting involved. Thanks, staff. Did a great job, and happy spring solstice.
So just for clarification, today's meeting was kind of based on the question that Dave asked for answers at the last meeting. I don't know that I have clear direction for what you'd like me to do at the next meeting.
Okay, all right. I guess I was thinking about what we were doing before the next meeting. What? Multiple choice. What are my options? I think continuing to update this spreadsheet. Does everybody know how to find that? Did everyone see in the email the link to the spreadsheet?
I will put the most recent version. I will update it with all of the public comments I've got to date, and I will put it at the top of the list so that it's the first document you click on by accident or on purpose. It'll be at the top of the list.
Okay. And what would you say, how much time would you need to incorporate comments from us before the next meeting?
Email me a week before.
Okay. So I guess that would be my ask from the commissioners. Get back to Travis with what you found in time for that.
Okay.
For the next meeting?
Yeah, so a week before the next meeting.
Okay.
That's still not any guidance tonight, but do you think that'll be enough to get us to the next meeting?
If I get the transportation draft, that itself
Yeah, it
would
could be a whole
would be
meeting.
worth a good conversation.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. And I would say, if anybody's feeling lost, I guess contact Travis. Contacting me is a little more complicated, but and Travis, if you're feeling lost, you can contact me, I guess. Yeah. Sort of seemed we're kind of blind leading the blind a little bit here, but hopefully we've got some direction. I feel all right?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming out. Down, grab some donuts if you want them, or your family might at home. And motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
I second it.
All right.
I'm gonna close.
Aye.
We're done
I live on Inslee.
at 9
Yes.
p.m.
I see that. Is that the one that goes through? Or
These chairs are
it
so
goes
low to the
up?
ground.
It goes-
Oh,
it
do you?
goes-
Yes.
I'm
And
used to feeling that way, but
If you
My
go
knees are
up,
a little
it's a
bent a
little,
little- up a
you
little
know, you're
much.
going up a
Too
hill,
much.
and there's at one point, they've got a gate across there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank
Was
you very
it-
much.
No worries, I got
Was
it.
it recording?
My
Was it saving to the?
photograph
I don't need to do the save to the computer thing anymore, do I?
Yes, you do need to save to the computer.
and just go up Gunco Road, because you jump
Oh.
pretty high.
Yeah,
Oh, how?
well, you know, you're right. Even before the gate, you're up high enough probably.
Yeah,